Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for making time for us this afternoon. As most people will be aware, the House of Assembly is scheduled to sit again on Friday, the 3rd of February, having been closed since the 2nd of December last year. I would like today to share the policing plan with everyone so that everyone can be clear about what to expect on Friday and there'll be no surprises on the day. So I'll start by saying that on Friday there will be no access to the grounds of the House of Assembly by members of the public. There are two reasons for this. The first one is that police wish to safeguard any interference with the legislature. That includes blocking members from access to the grounds, interfering with the lawful activities of the House of Assembly, and any potential damage that could be caused to the building. The second reason for that is that the grounds of the House of Assembly do not safely lend themselves to accommodating large groups of people. The police wish to safeguard against any potential injuries that could result from large crowds congregating on uneven ground, concrete steps, low walls, and grassy hillsides. In order to manage any large crowds that might assemble on the day, Parliament Street will be restricted to one lane of traffic on the western side, between the junctions of Reed Street and Church Street. The eastern side of Parliament Street, that's the side that's closest to the House, will be reserved for pedestrians. If any more space is required, then Reed Street will be closed to vehicles after the 9 a.m. rush hour traffic has cleared between the junctions of Court Street and Parliament Street. This will effectively create two sides of the House of Assembly, Parliament Street and Reed Street, that will be designated as protest areas. The police will consider other road closures if the need arises, based on the actual numbers that might actually be in attendance on the day. Members of the public will not be permitted through any of the House gates. The gate on Parliament Street must remain clear and unobstructed at all times to allow authorized entry and exit, particularly for emergency vehicles. The public gallery at the Assembly will be open, and members of the public wishing to visit the gallery must present themselves to the police officers at the Parliament Street gate. The public is reminded that the gallery holds a maximum of 37 people at one time. In the event that there are no protesters, then policing at the House of Assembly will simply revert back to normal. There have not been many indications that protests are in fact being planned. And those political leaders and labor leaders who have spoken publicly have stated that any protests that do take place will do so peacefully. That is extremely encouraging news. But the police wish to remind the public once again that protests must be peaceful and lawful. Peaceful means the absence of violence. Lawful means that protesters do not engage in activities that might constitute a criminal offense. I draw your attention to the statement made on the 3rd of December by the Center for Justice. Unlawful activities during an otherwise peaceful protest might include any of the following: blocking and preventing access through the gates of the House of Assembly, interfering with the free exercise of any member of Parliament or a senator, interfering with the lawful activity of the House of Assembly, obstructing or assaulting police officers in the execution of their duties, and participating in a public procession without a permit from the Deputy Governor's office. So that's our plan. I would like to close by recognizing that the 2nd of December was not a good day for police and public relations. Everyone should be interested in ensuring that the events of that day are not repeated. The BPS has worked extremely hard for several years to raise public confidence in the police. Our community partnership in tackling gangs, guns, and violence is strong. The police do not want that effort to be weakened, and we do not want to be drawn into confrontations that are avoidable. We expect that any protest activity at the House of Assembly this Friday, next Friday, or at any time in the future will be conducted with peaceful intentions and lawful conduct. I hope that this briefing today has assisted in providing absolute clarity in that regard, and I will be happy to answer any questions to assist further.
You've been conducting a report, Commissioner, on this September the 2nd incident. What has been the findings of that report?
The findings will be made available to the governor. The plan will be he'll read those findings in conjunction with the report that he's asked from senior officers in the UK. And really it's about the planning and the resourcing and the operations of the day.
Did you have any evidence in that report that you can tell us about regarding deliberate organisation by others behind the scenes to make this into a violent confrontation?
Unfortunately, not at this time. There's lots that the police would like to say in terms of our own interpretation of what took place that day, but you'll appreciate there's the police reporting to the governor, there's an independent review from the UK, there are criminal investigations that are ongoing and recommendations for prosecutions that have been made to the Director of Public Prosecutions, as well as the Independent Police Complaints Authority looking into complaints against police. So with all of that activity, it really makes it difficult for us to answer what happened on that day in any greater detail than we've already reported publicly, I'm afraid.
But you would warn against anyone attempting to do that?
Well, I think the point of coming out today is just to make it crystal clear that there is a very immediate difference, obvious difference between peaceful protest that doesn't have violence associated with it and peaceful protest that is that has elements of unlawful activity. And what we don't want is protesters shielding themselves with the label of peaceful just because it's not violent. It needs to be peaceful, absolutely, but it also needs to comply with the law. And what we're pointing out is the way you avoid running afoul of the law is that you don't block access to the House of Assembly, you don't interfere with the lawful activities, and you abide with the instructions of the police. And that's really the key message that I hope gets across today.
Will officers be armed with pepper spray as they were on December 2nd?
Officers carry pepper spray as part of their daily protective gear every day of the week.
And so, could it be used? Could you envisage a scenario when it might be used again?
Well, I don't want to cause alarm in the public and try and drag the events of the 2nd December into the 3rd of February. Officers carry batons and handcuffs and pepper spray and taser, and some officers are armed 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So I don't want to confuse the public with that. If your question is, are we going to deploy pepper spray, that isn't what this is about. We're about trying to manage large crowds in a peaceful and lawful way.
But you must appreciate there was a lot of criticism of the use of pepper spray from various sections of the community.
And that's why there are a number of reports that will get to the bottom of what actually happened. Without the reports, there isn't too much more I can say.
But you couldn't rule it out with the use of it because, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm not going to be drawn into making that direct connection. Officers carry protective gear to protect themselves.
Okay. The senior police officer from the UK the governor is asked to look at this. Is that person here yet, and have they begun their work?
You need to take that up with the governor.
Okay, so you can't comment on that at all. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes.
How many officers will be detailed at the House of Assembly?
Well, what we've come up with is more of a generic plan to make space for protests, and I really think that is one of the key learning points for us. This isn't an area that the BPS has been exposed to very much over the last few years, so I think we can be forgiven if our public order training isn't as advanced as our firearms training, because we've been in that sort of space for the last 7 years. We've had to put a lot of energy into making sure our officers are trained around the deployment of firearms. The key learning point for us is that protest has not been a key part of our democracy for a long time. It happens, absolutely, but it doesn't happen, or it hasn't happened with enough regularity that we would plan that into the events of the day. So rather than focus on 2nd of December, 3rd of February, we're focusing on generic plans that would allow us to police protests at events, whether it's the House of Assembly or whether it's somewhere else. And the key to that is making sure of two things. One is it has to be scalable. So the smaller the event, the less police officers we need. The larger the event, the more police you can expect to be there. And that the whole thing is proportionate. And that's really what we're focusing on in terms of our plans.
Okay, your plan for Friday then, very different from December 2nd, vastly different from March, where we had thousands of people on the House of Assembly grounds for a week. Is this an admission that December the 2nd was an inadequate response from the police?
No, it isn't an admission. I think without going into the specifics of the 2nd of December, which will all be disclosed in a number of separate reports, what this is a future-looking plan that's designed to enable us to balance two important things here. One is we must make space for peaceful protest that is lawful. That's part of our responsibility, our policing responsibility. But at the same time, we must also ensure that the rule of law is observed and that the processes of the legislature are allowed to take place. And what happened on the 2nd of December was that those two objectives collided with one another. It was not possible to do both, and we have to do both. So these plans are really designed to try and make it easier for both things to coexist.
Well,
so how do you define violence as part of a protest? I mean, if there's 1,000 people there and one person's violence, is that a violent protest? How do you draw that line?
I didn't suggest I was trying to. I don't understand your question.
Okay. Are you saying that December 2nd was a violent protest?
No. What I've said since December 2nd to today is that elements of the protest were unlawful and elements of the protest were violent. But I'm not labeling the whole thing. I haven't done that.
Okay, but we can deal with one or two violent people by arresting them, correct?
Sure. I don't know what's your question?
I'm trying to get you to characterize December 2nd. You know, was it, in your view, a violent protest?
Yeah, I've never labeled it or characterized it as a violent protest. And I just explained again with clarity, there were elements of the protest that were unlawful, that required a police intervention, and there was elements of violence.
How many recommendations for prosecution have you actually made to the DPP?
We're not able to share that.
Why not?
Any final questions?
To go back to March, when Parliament was shut down, we know that from the party request that the Gazette put in, that you had a plan for December the 2nd that was, I think it was dated like 2 days before. You knew what had happened in March, you knew that Parliament had been shut down at that point. So it's, why didn't you, in that plan, do what you say that you're going to be doing now? I find a way to get MPs into the House so that Parliament didn't have to shut down. You knew it could happen, because it had happened.
Right. I'm sorry, you have to explain that question again for me.
In March, we saw that Parliament could be shut down by protesters. So at that point, presumably the police would start to think, we must make sure this doesn't happen again. We must make sure that democracy is not shut down.
Right.
And so between March and December, you had a period of 8 months. But throughout that time, you could have been coming up with a plan to say, how can we as police make sure Parliament doesn't get shut down? So when December the 2nd, when it came about, there was going to be another protest.
No, I understand your question. So the plan was not to have it shut down. Certainly the intentions and the objectives came from the angle that the idea was to police it in a way that being shut down was not an outcome. So I think your question, I think this will answer your question. We perhaps didn't have the right contingency in there for what happens if we can't get into the Parliament, because that wasn't the plan. The plan was to keep it open. So
are you saying that police didn't expect on the December the 2nd protest for protesters to try to prevent MPs from entering Parliament? You're saying that wasn't an expected outcome?
No, I'm saying that wasn't the outcome that we were policing towards. So,
but I don't understand what you mean, because there were protesters who may well, and in fact you even said in the op order, or whoever wrote the op order said, pointed to the Parliament Act and said these are some offences that might occur shutting down Parliament. So you knew that there was a potential for that.
Yes.
So then surely the plan would be geared, one element of the plan would be geared towards making sure that Parliament wasn't shut down and that MPs were able to get in to the House.
Yeah, so the plan didn't work.
Okay, and can you talk about what that plan was? So how were you going to get MPs inside the House on December 2nd, and how did that fail?
Yeah, no, that's a tactic that I'm not prepared to talk about publicly.
Was it mainly lack of training by the officers?
No, I don't think that's it.
Okay, I'm sorry if we keep on about December 2nd, but you've already alluded to the fact that it impacted police public relations, correct? Mm-hmm. In March, which was quite the opposite, people were actually quite pleased with the police and the way they handled that. So I guess my question is then about the use of pepper spray, because that seems to be the one that impacted public relations the most. The policies that I've been looking at say that it's not indicated for crowd control. You've described it as protective gear for police. Mm-hmm. Was it appropriate then for your officers, and I'm thinking specifically about that one officer who had 2 canisters from inside the House of Grounds of Assembly.
Can I stop? I have to stop you, and I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
Because you want to have a trial in the court of public opinion on TV, and we can't do that. I've explained this will be the 3rd time. There are. Can I finish my answer? There are 4 different reports that are being done on the events, and we need those reports to be completed, and we need the people that have the appropriate authority to make their reviews, whether it's the DPP or whether it's the PCA, to make their determinations. And this isn't helpful. Trying to have a trial on TV is not helpful.
Not a trial. I just have one question about that, though. Does the policy allow an officer to use 2 canisters at the same time? That's my question.
Well, this is the question you sent to us, and our response was it doesn't disallow that. It's not a prohibited action, and there's all sorts of reasons that could happen. So.
I have a further question. Did you or any of your senior commanders speak to the Premier or any of his team on December the 2nd at all?
Yes.
Can you elaborate on when you spoke to them and what you spoke about?
Well, I don't have the exact times, but the conversation was really about what was happening and what our efforts were in terms of trying to get them inside. Some of the conversation was about the uncertainty of whether or not the House would sit, so we were trying to bottom that out. And you didn't ask the question specifically, but we've been asked this through party requests about 12 times, and I said this on the day. There was no discussion between myself and the Premier about tactics. There was no directions given, no directions received, and the reason for that, quite frankly, is because the police work independently of the government in that regard.
So you wouldn't have mentioned to the Premier during any of those conversations that officers would be there with riot helmets and pepper spray? That wouldn't have come up during any of those conversations? No,
there would have been, that wouldn't have worked itself into the conversation.
No, and didn't?
And it didn't.
And it didn't?
No.
Any final questions from anyone other than Io or Sam, please? I'm just trying to give other people an opportunity. Final questions. Trevor?
And let me just say something. I'm going to jump in here because this is really important, okay? And this is the message I want you to take away. There will be lessons learned for everyone from the 2nd of December, and that includes the police. But everyone needs to take the lessons away. And we need to be really clear, because we've got more work to do. We've got a House of Assembly that needs to open up on Friday. It needs to stay open because it's got lots of business to get through. So the whole point of looking forward is trying to learn the lessons from the 2nd of December, not to repeat the bad ones, and to put the things in place to make sure that we can facilitate peaceful and lawful protest, because there really should not be anything to be afraid of in a democracy. All you need to do is watch the American news. They get it.
Sorry.
They understand the principle that there is space for protest. That is a component part of democracy. So we're not trying to shut that down in any way. What we're trying to make clear is it must coincide with the rule of law. It's not one or the other. It has to be both.
So when should we issue a warning before December the 2nd?
What type of warning should have we issued?
Today, don't breach the Parliament Act. Don't stop MPs getting into the House, because if you do, we'll have body cams on,
Right.
picking up evidence, and
Okay.
be arrested.
Thank you for your suggestion. I appreciate it. So the whole point of this is to make this point going forward, that both things have to coexist, and we just have to make space. And that's what we're trying to do with our plan, is make space in
Don't use the American thing.
Next week, Friday, February 10th.
the principle of protest. That's the
Friday,
point.
February 10th is going to be a highly contested debate on the airport.
Yeah.
Which is cause for the hoopla. Are you going to put the same contingency plan in place?
Yeah, as I said, so what we're trying to do is develop a plan that is a blueprint for managing large crowds who protest. Because the problem is the geography of the House of Assembly. It's, built in 1700s or 1800s or whatever. It's not designed to make space. If you go to other major cities, think of London, and you've got the House of Parliament, and you've got like a square block that's set aside for people to set up and protest. We don't have that. So the police are really on the back foot, if you like, because there are no plans in place. There never have been. There's never been a reason for that. And the geography, the physical layout of the House of Assembly is not the best place to try and police that. I mean, it's hills and steps and low walls. I mean, you don't want crowds of people around there. So we're doing the best we can with what we have so that we can have both. We can have protests where people don't have to compete with vehicle traffic, where they are not at risk of getting injured because of the ground surface, and the House of Assembly sits. And it's not just the House of Assembly. This could be anywhere in Bermuda. It could be the docks. It could be a school. It could be a court. It doesn't matter. We've generated this plan so that we can have a solid plan that facilitates both safely, and the police intervention is as minimum as it can possibly be, because quite frankly, we don't want to be in this space.
How many numbers of officers do you think you have to deploy for this operation?
So again, it's scalable. The bigger, the more people that attend, the more officers we have available. The less people attend, the less officers. But we'll have enough.